What's up guys, it's Ryan here, and welcome to this low-level or beginner guide to Melee Araxxor. Now before we start, I just want to quickly say this guide will not make up for practice, and practice absolutely every single time makes perfect. Even though this guide will cover everything you need to know, beginner setups, tips, all that stuff, every single attack, every single mechanic, every single phase, you will still most likely need to practice, and you might fail a couple times, but if you persevere, you'll definitely be able to get it. Also wanted to say, I already have a ranged Araxxor guide, and I was initially planning on making this sort of like a follow-up to that guide, but I don't want to start a video by saying, oh, make sure you watch this other 20-minute video, so we're just going to cover everything in this one. One of the biggest criticisms on the last Araxxor guide I did was that I didn't go into enough detail on every single path rotation. I only focused on the easiest rotation because it's best for learners, so this time we are going to be covering absolutely everything. I do have a table of contents, so you can skip around and go to wherever you want to go. I'll also throw it in the description down below, so it's just like easier to click on and stuff. Now, one last thing before we kick this off, I like to use the worst gear. Less is more on this channel. I like to prove that you don't need 100 million gear to be able to kill this boss, so I did all of the backing footage for this video with no armor at all and a rune halberd. I'm not saying that I recommend doing this, and definitely if all you have is a rune halberd, you're gonna have a really rough time killing this boss, but it's more just to exaggerate the point that you do not need really good gear to be able to kill this boss. You just need practice. So anyways, without further ado, let's do this. For starters, here's some general information about Araxxor. Araxxor is level 2500, has 400,000 life points, is poisonous, is immune to poison, and is also immune to stun. Araxxor attacks with a different combat style depending on what combat style you're using, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Before we talk about that, we're going to talk about requirements and recommendations. As for requirements, I'd require you to have 50 plus defense, 70 plus attack and strength, 43 plus prayer, 52 plus summoning for the spirit Halberd, as well as at the very least a rune halberd. When we're looking at recommendations, these are things that you definitely don't need at all, but any of these things you can get your hands on are going to help you considerably. First off, we've got 85 plus attack and strength, 70 plus prayer for the piety prayer, overloads, 68 plus summoning for a war tortoise, as well as a few million coins for gear. All these things are going to make a big difference, and they're going to make your learning a little bit easier. So if you fail a couple times with the absolute base requirements, you might want to upgrade to some of these things, and they can make a big difference. Now that we've talked requirements, let's talk about gear. In general, you're going to want to use the highest tiered melee armor and weapons you can. Use the highest tiered beast of burden you can, and also use of a halberd type weapon can be beneficial. In general, it's a little bit easier to learn Araxxor with a halberd type weapon, which is any melee weapon with an attack range of 2. This could be any of the regular weapons that have halberd in the name, as well as a dragon rider lance or a noxious scythe. That being said, in this video we will be covering all of the differences between using a halberd and not using a halberd, and we're going to cover everything you need to know regardless of whether or not you have a halberd. Now, a couple things to make sure you bring an anti-poison potion and a pheromone if you're not using an instance. We're going to talk about spawning in just a second, so don't worry if that doesn't make sense right now. You can consider Ceridome and brews like room for error. The more brews you bring, the more mistakes you can make before you lose the kill by running out of food. That being said, if you bring 40 brews, you're not going to make that much profit, so you might just be better off practicing a little bit more with a couple less brews. I'd recommend anywhere between 2 and 8 when you're first starting off. Alright, now it's time to talk about the spawn mechanics. In an instance that costs 200k or with a pheromone in your inventory, Araxxor will automatically spawn weak to you in the combat triangle. This makes the kill significantly easier, and it's always worth doing this. If you have the money, a pheromone is definitely preferred because it retains its value. A pheromone costs about 2 mil, and you could kill Araxxor 100 times with that pheromone, and then you could still sell it back for 2 mil, so you're actually not losing any money as long as you can pay the upfront. An instance is different because it costs you 200k per hour, but the one advantage to an instance is sometimes it can be difficult to find a world, as if you're not using an instance, only one person can fight Araxxor per world. That being said, with a couple hops, you should be good to go with your pheromone, and that is still what I would strongly recommend. Now, I'm going to really quickly touch on the Enrage mechanic. Every time you kill Araxxor, the base Enrage will increase by 20% up to a maximum of 300%. Enrage affects the accuracy and damage of every attack of Araxxor's, including special attacks. What this means is the more times you kill Araxxor per day, the more difficult each subsequent fight will be. This doesn't really affect people who are learning the boss because you'll be learning on 0%, and the Enrage will only go up if you complete a kill. So if you die in a kill, you can try again the same day and it will still start at 0%. Let's talk rotation. There are 3 different paths: Minion Path, Light Path, and Acid Path. 2 of these 3 paths will be open at a time, and mechanics from both open paths will be incorporated into the fight. When you're learning, I'd recommend you wait until paths 2 and 3 are open, as minions can be a little bit difficult to deal with. That being said, we're going to be going into detail on each path and each rotation so that you won't be caught off guard by any surprise mechanics. If you want to find out which 2 paths are open, you can go into your Beasts tab and it will tell you which tunnel is currently blocked. The other 2 tunnels will be open. Okay, now we've covered all the general information that you need to know about the boss. We've covered requirements, recommendations, what to bring, enrage mechanics, spawn mechanics, and all that good to know stuff. So now it's time to talk about the actual fight. For starters, we're going to talk about the mechanics that occur regardless of what tunnels are open. Those are the mechanics on all rotations. The first mechanic we're going to talk about is the web shield. For the web shield, Araxxor will encase himself in webs and any damage you do to the boss will become reflected back onto you. What you want to do is you want to equip your shield and then you want to just use defensive abilities like resonance, preparation, and provoke. This will just make sure that you're still gaining adrenaline while you can't attack the boss. What you'll also notice in that clip there is I used the Quake ability and then I quickly switched to my shield and used resonance. This is a decent way to give yourself a heal, but it's definitely more of an advanced tip that you do not need to do to successfully kill the boss. In general, just make sure you stop attacking the boss and build adren. Once you've used your 3 defensive abilities, wait 1 game tick and then you can get back on the boss without risk of hurting yourself. The next attack we're going to talk about is the cleave. Araxxor will pull you into melee distance and swipe you with an attack that on 0% enrage can hit upwards of 5,000 unblockable damage. Now, it's really important to note that if you have anticipation or freedom active, you won't actually get pulled into the boss, which does make it easier to escape. That being said, unlike a range kill where if you have anticipation or freedom active, you don't need to move at all, you still need to move when you're in melee distance. If you're using a scythe or anything with halberd range, you need to move back 1 square, where if you're using something like dragors or twin blades, you need to move back 2 squares. The trick for this is really practice, and this is the main difference between a ranged kill and a melee kill when you're learning. As soon as you start to see that animation, you need to click back the right amount of squares, otherwise you're gonna get hit. When you're first starting off, a really good tip for the cleaves is just make sure your life points are high. If your life points are above the 5,000 range, you have nothing to worry about because even if you mess up and you get hit by the cleave, you're still gonna live and you can keep on practicing that kill. The last thing I'm gonna point out about how I'm dodging this cleave is you're gonna see I'm attacking in halberd range before the cleave, but after the cleave, I get run into melee distance. Afterwards, I step back 1 square so that I can continue to attack in a halberd range. The reason for this is when I'm in a halberd range, I'm only getting hit by Araxxor's range attacks, whereas if you move that 1 square forward, you get pulled that 1 square forward, you can also be attacked by melee. The melee attacks hit a lot harder than the range attacks, so if you are using a halberd, it is definitely worth stepping that 1 square back. Alright, next up we've got the easiest mechanic on all rotations in the entire fight, the web trap. This one's really simple. You get encased in a web, you need to spam click to get out of the web. You can spam click underneath yourself, spam click on your familiars, spam click backwards, frontwards, on Araxxor, it does not matter at all as long as you are clicking. If you have anticipation or freedom active when you get web trapped, you'll get out a lot quicker and you don't need to click nearly as much. Alright, the last mechanic on all rotations is the spider eggs. This one is also extremely simple. When Araxxor spawns either 2 or 3 spider eggs, you stand on top of them to avoid being hit 3,000 damage. It's also worth noting that if you don't stand on top of them, each of those eggs will also spawn a minion, and those minions will attack you. You'll end up taking 3,000 damage plus any extra damage from the minions, and it will not be a good time. And that's really all there is to it. When you see the eggs, you stand on the eggs. Now we're going to talk about Phase 2. These are all of the rotation-specific mechanics. Like I said before, in my previous guide, we only talked about the light path. So this time around, we're going to go into detail on every single path so that regardless of what day it is and regardless of what paths are open, you'll know what to do. Let's get right into the nitty-gritty here and start by talking about Path 1, the dreaded Minion Path. When you go down Path 1, 20 minions will spawn 5 at a time. You want to kill them as quickly as possible. In each of the first 3 batches of minions, 1 special minion will spawn. This will either be a mirrorback spider or a pulsing spider. The mirrorback spider reflects any damage you deal to Araxxor back onto you, and you need to kill it immediately as soon as it spawns or you're gonna have a really bad day. The pulsing spider heals Araxxor and should also be prioritized because if you leave it alive, you're just undoing all the damage you've previously done in the phase. So on paper, it doesn't sound too bad. 20 spiders spawn, you kill the 20 spiders, not a problem, but it can be a little bit tricky to get used to. A lot of the time, you'll just try and do some damage to Araxxor as the minions are spawning, and then you'll end up one-hitting yourself off the mirrorback. I would strongly recommend when you're first starting off, just as soon as you see the animation that the minions are going to spawn, just get off the boss and let the minions spawn and deal with them as soon as they pop up. You'll save yourself some food from taking extra damage from the minions, and that way you don't end up one-hitting yourself. Once you get Araxxor's health down to 5,000 from the first phase, you run into the Path 1, and then that is when the Minion Path begins. I've sped up the very start because the minions haven't spawned, but in just a second here, you are going to see the animation that signifies minions are coming. What I do is I get off the boss right away, and I start dealing with these minions. Now, you're going to see me get absolutely torn to shreds here, and the reason that is just because I'm not wearing any armor at all. It's a little exaggerated, and it makes this path look a lot harder than it actually is just because of the gear I'm using. As you can see, the mirrorback spider spawned, and as soon as I saw it, I killed it before attacking Araxxor at all. Now, it's also important to note that all of the same mechanics from earlier that we went over continue in this phase, so look out for those cleaves, look out for those spider eggs, look out for those web shields, and you should be just fine. So that was the first batch of minions dealt with. Now, a really good tip to figure out which spider is going to be the special spider is as follows. In the first batch, the third spider to spawn will be either a mirrorback or a pulsing spider. In the second batch of minions, the second spider will be the special spider, and in the third batch, the very first minion to spawn will be the special spider. So especially for the third batch of minions, you need to be extremely careful that you're getting off the boss the second you see that animation. But anyways, it's exactly as you'd expect. I'm just doing damage to Araxxor between the minion spawns. Sometimes the minions just spawn back to back to back to back, and they come really quickly, and then other times you'll have some other mechanics in between. So as you can see, second batch is up, and the second spider to spawn, like I said before, is the mirrorback. And it's really simple as that. All you do is you deal with these spiders, and you do as best as you can with them. It's also definitely worth using your area of effect abilities in certain instances because you can take care of the minions a lot quicker that way. Just make sure that you get the mirrorback done with non-multi-target abilities first, because if you use an area of effect ability that attacks a mirrorback as well as Araxxor, you're still gonna get reflected damage onto yourself. We're gonna speed things up from here on out because you completely understand the gist of it. There's the third set of minions, the mirrorback spawned first, and then it's just the exact same thing. You're gonna see that I keep dealing with the same mechanics you've already been over, and you just wait for those minions to spawn. Now, it's also worth noting, as soon as you get Araxxor to 5,000 life points, you should run up the path into phase 3. Once you've dealt with the 20 minions that have spawned, you won't have to deal with any more in the third phase or at any other point, so all you have to do is get Araxxor down to about 5,000 life points, and then you can just surge down the path, and as soon as you cross into the next area of the fight, phase 3 will start. So congratulations, and you just beat phase 2. Now we're gonna talk about path 2, Acid Path. In the Acid Path, you need to lure Araxxor into the acid pool until the acidity level reaches approximately 75%. At this point, you walk to the top of the platform, and the acid on Araxxor will melt the platform. Once the platform is melted, you can move on to the next phase. When Araxxor does a melee attack animation that doesn't hit you, that means a one-hit spider has been released. Wherever it lands, you need to run away from that area or use a defensive ultimate like Barricade or Immortality to avoid an instant and sure death. The Acid Path is really simple. Once you get phase 1 down to below 5,000 life points, simply run into the acid and make sure Araxxor is chilling in that acid. You'll see in a second the acid bar will pop up and it will start to fill up. Now, it's important to note this bar goes up to 200%, so when it's about a third full, you're about the 70% mark, and that's a good time to start running up the path. All of the same mechanics we talked about earlier are still going to be present, so just keep in mind for the cleaves, the swipes, the web shields, the web traps, all that stuff, and you should be completely fine here. You also want to try to do as much damage as you can to Araxxor during this phase, because any life points over 5,000 Araxxor has left at the end of the phase will actually get healed in phase 3. You don't really want that to happen, so just try and focus on doing damage, although the main focus should still be avoiding those mechanics. Once your acidity bar is about 2/3 full, you want to make sure you're going up to the top of the path. You're going to want to go to at least the square I'm standing on right here. You'll see it in just a second, and you'll actually get a message on your screen that lets you know you're far enough as the path starts to degrade. It'll read the acid on Araxxor drips and starts to degrade the platform below. That's when you know Araxxor's in a good spot and the platform is getting degraded. So the same mechanics keep up, and it's exactly the same thing. I'm also going to mention that you definitely need to look out for one-hit spiders here, because if a one-hit spider spawns and you're at the top of the platform, you need to run down the platform or use a defensive ultimate like Barricade or Immortality. If you don't do this, you're gonna get exploded. So just make sure you're looking out for it, and it can be really easy to miss the one-hit spider, especially because of how well it blends into the platform. Once the platform finishes degrading, you've successfully completed phase 2, and you're good to go into phase 3. We're gonna take one more quick look at what the one-hit spider attack looks like. As you can see, there's a melee attack animation, but nothing actually hits you. At that point, you'll see a little green splotch sort of on the left-hand side of my screen, and that signifies a one-hit spider coming, and you'll see it running down the platform. When the one-hit spider spawns, it'll walk towards you until its bar is completely full. If it hits you before the bar fills up, it will completely explode you, and you will get one hit regardless of what your life points are at, so it's definitely worth looking out for, and just make sure you avoid that at all costs. Like I said before, you can also avoid it with Barricade or Immortality, although I would strongly recommend just getting out of the way of it in most cases. Last but definitely not least, we've got the Light Path. The Light Path is a complete time phase. What this means is it does not matter what your stats are, what your gear is, it will still take you the exact same amount of time to get through it. So if you're a lower level player or you don't have a very high tier weapon, say you're using something like a Rune Halberd, Light Path is definitely the path for you because it'll get you through phase 2 extremely quickly, and it's the only path where you don't have to do that 100,000 damage to get through. There'll be one spot of light in the path, and you basically just need to stand in it to avoid constant damage. Twice in this path, Araxxor will charge at you. As long as you click the same way as Araxxor's legs, you won't take any damage, and Araxxor will damage the wall. Once the wall gets completely damaged, which is twice correctly, you'll be able to move into phase 3, no problem at all. So just like before, as soon as you get phase 1 to about 5,000 life points, you can run down the light path, and then you're going to be in complete darkness until a light spot pops up somewhere along the path. This light spot will periodically move around, and you just want to make sure that you're in it for as long as you possibly can be. If you have the mobile perk, it's extremely helpful to get around, but obviously it's not required at all. When Araxxor does the egg spawn attack, it's exactly how you'd expect it to be. You just want to make sure you get in there so you don't take that 3,000 damage hit, and then you get back into your light spot. It's also worth noting that you get attacked with periodic ranged and then magic attacks back to back to back. Araxxor will continue to alternate, and you can use defensive abilities to get a heal in, like resonance, preparation, stuff like that, but also it's definitely worth it to prayer switch. It's super easy, and you have tons of time between each switch, and it will save you a lot of food in the long run. After about a minute of just kind of chilling out in the light path, you get a message saying Araxxor prepares to come down from the ceiling and charge, and at this point just mentally prepare yourself for having to click an arrow in a completely reasonable amount of time. You can also use your arrow keys for this, just as a heads up, and yeah, it's very simple. If Araxxor's legs are pointing to the right, you would click right or tap your right arrow key, left is left. If Araxxor's legs are pointing directly towards you and they're sort of like flat, making a plane, then you're gonna click up, and if they're pointing downwards, then you click down, and that's all you need to do. This happens twice, and then as soon as it happens twice, you're gonna be good to move into P3. It's as easy as that. Now, if you mess up, don't panic. You'll be hit for a little bit of damage, and instead of breaking down the wall halfway, it'll only break down the wall a quarter of the way. So basically, it'll mean you'll have to do it one more extra time. That's really all there is to the light path. Very simple, very straightforward, and then you're good to go into P3. Speaking of P3, we should probably cover that now. Phase 3 will combine the mechanics of both of the open paths, regardless of which path you took in phase 2. The only exception is that if you kill all 20 spider minions in the second phase when you're going down Minion Path, you won't have to deal with any minions at all in phase 3. Phase 3 is basically just a repeat of the first phase. The only difference is depending on which paths are open, you have some other mechanics to deal with that'll get mixed in to the regular jumble of mechanics you're already familiar with. If Light Path is open, there will be light spots that open up that you can stand in to take less damage. If Acid Path is open, you'll still have to deal with the one-hit spiders as well as these other spiders that you can lure into Araxxor to make the fourth phase a little easier. And if Minion Path was open and you didn't go down it initially, you'll have to deal with your 20 minions in the third phase. So let's see what that looks like. As soon as phase 2 is done, you'll jump into phase 3 regardless of which path you initially took in the second phase. I'm assuming that if Minion Path was open, you would have already taken it and gone down it. You already know how to deal with the 20 minions, so this example is from paths 2 and 3, so you'll see mechanics from both of those two phases. So you're going to see some light spots, and you're also going to see some highly acidic spiders. If a highly acidic spider pops up, what you can do is you can click on it and lure it into Araxxor. Araxxor will heal 5,000 life points, but the fourth phase will be significantly easier. When you're first learning how to kill the boss, this is usually worth doing, so make sure you lure those spiders before you go into Araxxi. Other than the couple new mechanics, this is really identical to the first phase. You've got the exact same mechanics happening, and as you can see, there's a light spot because Light Path is open. What I do here is I stand in it, and then depending on your food situation, you could either stay stood in the light path, or you could just resume doing damage to Araxxor. For me, I had plenty of food left, so I thought, why don't we just carry on killing the boss? The one other special mechanic we could end up getting is right here, and that is a one-hit spider. You're going to see the splotch on sort of the right bottom part of my screen there, and that is the one only other thing you really need to look out for on this phase whenever the middle path is open, because it's the only thing that can really one-hit you, especially on low Enrage. All the other mechanics you can basically just eat food to survive from. So yeah, the one-hit spiders are the main thing you really need to pay attention to and look out for. Anyways, at this point, I'm just going to speed everything up because you've already seen all of the possible special mechanics, and it really just is identical to phase phase 1. You're looking out for the spider eggs, you're looking out for the light spots, the one-hit spiders, and it is extremely simple. All you have to do is get Araxxor's life points all the way down to 0, and then the last phase, Araxxi, will begin. Now, obviously, I'm currently using a rune halberd. This is in triple speed, and it still took me a very long time. This kill actually took like 14 minutes, and that's not a surprise to me at all. I'm assuming most people trying this will have something better than a rune halberd, so it shouldn't take quite this long, but you will notice I'm not actually using that much food, even though I'm not wearing armor, just because I'm properly dodging all of these mechanics. So anyway guys, once Araxxor's life points drop to 0, Araxxi will begin. Okay, so Araxxi is by far the place where the most people make mistakes and mess up and die, and it can be extremely frustrating when you're starting to learn it. There are just so many different things you need to take care of at the same time and look out for at the same time, and it can be really overwhelming, especially if you don't practice too much. First thing I'm going to say is prayer switching can be extremely helpful on Araxxi. It can make a huge difference and you'll save a lot of food. That being said, if you're feeling super overwhelmed by dodging all the regular mechanics and you can't get around to prayer switching, don't worry about it. It is not required, especially on really low enrages. Araxxi combines the mechanics from phase 1 while also attacking with 2 different combat styles. Araxxi will unleash an acid wave at 25,000 life points and will stop using special attacks at 50,000 life points. Prayer switching is extremely different depending on your weapon choice, so before we get into a complete Araxxi, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you first off how to prayer switch if you're in melee distance using something like twin blades, and then after that we'll go back into halberd distance with our trusty rune halberd and I'll show you how to prayer switch there. Okay, so when you're standing in melee distance, how you prayer switch is you keep your home base on melee prey. Every single attack you dodge, you switch back to your melee prayer, and then you only switch to the magic prayer for 1 tick whenever you see a magic attack coming towards you. This is by far more difficult than prayer switching in halberd range, but I did want to let you guys know that it is possible because people seem to think that you can't actually prayer switch when you're in melee distance, but that's not true at all. It's the same thing as meleeing a Jad if you've ever done that before, but basically between each attack you need to switch back to the melee attack because the melee attack happens instantly, whereas the magic attack you actually have time to see the magic ball coming towards you and then you can switch to your magic prayer. This does take a good amount of practice, and if you're in melee distance and you're just learning, I would probably recommend just camping your mage prey and you can just tank those melee hits, especially when you're just starting out. That being said, eventually at a certain point, if you're doing a lot of kills in melee distance, you definitely want to get into the hang of prayer switching. At really high enrages, Araxxi can hit 4,000 plus if you miss a prayer switch, so you want to make sure you've got that down. Okay, now we're going to take a look at prayer switching when you're out of that melee distance and in your halberd range, and as you can see, it's a lot more simple. You basically see a range attack coming towards you, and then you pray ranged, see a magic attack coming towards you, and you're going to pray magic, and that's really all there is to it. It's extremely simple, it's extremely basic, and this is definitely worth doing. It's not nearly as challenging as being in melee distance, and that's why a lot of people prefer something like a Noxious Scythe or Dragon Rider Lance over something like Drygores, because in melee distance, the prayer switching can be extremely difficult. So exactly the same thing, if it's overwhelming to you and you can't figure out how to prayer switch properly, just completely ignore it and then just slap on your magic prayer, but on the whole, you should be able to figure this out, especially if you're planning on camping Araxxor long term. So now that we've covered the prayer switching and you know how to do that, we're going to actually take a look at one full Araxxi phase, done with my trusty rune halberd and no armor, and yeah, we'll just take a look at it. When the third phase of Araxxor ends, you want to make sure you're spam clicking Surge. The reason you do this is because you can actually surge out of the cutscene like you see me do, and it just gives you more time to prepare. Make sure your life points are high, you're potted up, all that good stuff. At this point, you want to Adren stall by switching to your shield, use some defensive abilities, and then just play the waiting game until Araxxi comes out. Now, as soon as the Araxxi phase starts, you want to use Anticipation so you don't get cleaved right off the bat, and then it is exactly as you'd expect it to be. Obviously, I'm using a rune halberd right now, so it just took an age and a half, but it's the same thing. You've got your P1 mechanics, just like that web shield right there, and all I'm doing is I'm focusing on my prayer switching, I'm focusing on doing as much damage as I can, and as a quick reminder, as soon as you get Araxxi to 50,000 life points, you won't have to deal with any more mechanics, so it gets way easier as soon as you get to the 50,000 life point mark, and that is something that's definitely worth keeping note of. As soon as you get to that 50k, it gets a whole lot easier until the acid core comes out. So you'll just see me doing some damage. I'm trying to get most of my prayer switches right. This wasn't a perfect kill by any means, but you'll just see I'm prioritizing my prayer switches, I'm keeping my life points high, and most importantly, I'm not panicking. As soon as you start panicking, things start going badly. So fast forward to 50k, you see Araxxi starts to get enraged, and at this point, the longer the fight lasts, the more damage Araxxi will begin to do, but basically you don't need to worry about it. Even with a rune halberd, it didn't get too bad for me. So basically, at this point, it gets even easier. You don't need to use Anticipation or Freedom anymore because there are no more mechanics. You can just focus on your prey switches, keep your life points high, and then you also want to keep your adrenaline as high as you possibly can, because as soon as the Acid Core comes out at 25k, you actually lose half of your remaining adrenaline. The Acid Core is where most people die, and it's actually really easy. Where people mess up is they freak out, they start running around like a chicken without a head, and then that is how things can go extremely badly, extremely quickly. So you're going to see here right before 25k, I'm going to use a Threshold ability, may as well do that before my adrenaline gets dropped in half, and it's very, very easy. Basically, you keep remaining as normal, you do the exact same thing you did before. The only difference is, as soon as the Acid Core lands on you, you need to move 1 square. That's all there is to it. So keep your life points high if you're worried about missing it, but you're gonna see it's gonna bounce around, and right here, it's about to land on me, it lands on me, and I move 1 square. That is all you need to do. I mean, I can deeps this down with a Rune Halberd, you will be just fine with something better than that, and then you just repeat the exact same thing over again. Work on your prey switches, and it lands on me again, I move 1 square, and that is all there is to it. It is so incredibly easy and so incredibly simple, and it's definitely nothing worth freaking out about. As long as you remain calm, you keep your life points high, nothing bad can happen to you. And there's your Rune Halberd Araxxor kill. At this point, we've covered every single mechanic, every single rotation, every path, all of that stuff has been covered, so it's just all about putting it all together. What you're watching right now is one full, complete, sped up Araxxor kill, and instead of basically repeating everything I've already talked about, we're going to talk about some other strategies and things to keep in mind when you're killing this boss. When you start an Araxxor kill, you need to click on whichever web corresponds to the path that you want to take down path to. So for me, I clicked on the middle web and I burned it down, and that is because I plan on taking the acid path. First off, Anticipation and Freedom. I said a couple times for a couple of the mechanics that they're way less effective as long as you have Anticipation or Freedom active, and how you do this is actually just by timing it properly. Araxxor uses a special attack every 5th attack, so as long as you're counting those attacks and on the 3rd or 4th attack you run an Anticipation or a Freedom, you'll always have it active in time for these mechanics, and that way you can make sure that you're always getting out of them as quickly as possible. That's one thing that takes a little bit of practice, but in the end, it's very, very easy. Just keep it in mind, every couple abilities you want to throw up Anticipation or Freedom, and you should never have them both on cooldown at the same time if you're doing it properly. They should be perfectly in sync, where you're using them as soon as they're available, and you never actually have to deal with any mechanics hurting you. Now, you've already seen this clip, and you already know how to do the acid path, so I'm going to skip it, and we're going to jump right into the 3rd phase. Like we talked about earlier, P3 is very similar to P1, you just have those extra couple mechanics you're dealing with. So as you can see, the acidic spider popped up, I lured it, and that just makes Araxxi a little bit easier and a little bit less damaging. And overall, you've already sort of seen this, but it's extremely simple. I'm focusing on keeping my life points nice and high, and the main thing you do in phase 3 is if the middle path is open, you're looking out for those one-hit spiders. That's the only thing in this phase that's actually going to kill you. Focus on doing the best DPS you can use Berserk, you can do all that stuff, Adren Pots, all that stuff is completely fine and good, but the first thing you should be prioritizing is looking out for those one-hit spiders. Now, sometimes I get comments where people are telling me that they're completely running out of food in the 3rd phase, or even sometimes in the 2nd phase, and a lot of the time I think there are 2 main mistakes people make. First one is you get really paranoid about your hit points, and you feel like you need to keep your life points at completely full the entire time. This is horrible for adrenaline gain, and you can just end up doing almost no damage. The other thing you can do is you can actually waste food. Like, you could eat a shark that heals 2,000, but you could eat it with only 1,000 life points left, just so you get to full, and you're wasting all of that extra health that you could have had. The second mistake that people make is sometimes you're so caught up in working on the mechanics and just dealing with all of them that you completely forget to run abilities and do damage, and that can also lead to a really, really bad time. Overall, all you need to do is just make sure you're practicing, and if that keeps happening, you keep running out of food on the 3rd phase, keep practicing, and every kill you do should be better than the last one. Okay, so now that we're in Araxxi, prayer switching can be the thing that you focus on, and just like you spend all of your time just watching those prayers and watching those attacks, and you can end up missing mechanics. So just like the 1st phase, make sure you're running your freedom, your anticipation, and you're looking out for those cleaves, because the cleaves are going to kill you. Missing a prayer switch or 2 probably not going to kill you on low Enrage. So even though prayer switching is really helpful and it's really good to be able to do, for your first kills if you're just starting out, it's less important than just looking at the mechanics. At this point, the acid core is out, you just got to remain calm and just move that 1 square every time it hits you. It's really not that difficult, but a lot of the time you can end up running around like a chicken without a head, and sometimes you just need to remind yourself to relax, chill out. It's not going to hit me that hard, it's not like it's an instant death every time it hits me. You move the 1 square and then you're good to go. So anyways, that was one complete Araxxor kill. Okay, so by this point, we've covered just about everything about this boss. We've covered requirements, recommendations, stats about the boss. We've talked about every single rotation and mechanic and attack, and we've actually put everything together into a complete kill as well. But a really important question is, why would you want to kill this boss? Well, Araxxor is one of the most profitable bosses in the entire game. Once you get good at it, you can make upwards of 10 mil an hour here, and it's incredible. A spider leg piece is a 1 in 35 drop rate, and once you get all three, you can combine that into a spider leg that sells for 135 mil. On top of that, if you get a hilt, you can make between 5 and 110 mil in one go, depending on what you get. Also worth noting, the average regular common drops at Araxxor are extremely valuable. You can get 2 onyxes, you can get onyx bolts, you get brews or restores or overloads or rocktails with almost every kill, and it's really good consistent money with some really great upside as well. And that's just about it from me. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments or concerns or anything of that sort, feel free to put it in the comment section below. I read and reply to every single comment. Also just want to say thank you for your patience, because this video was requested like 6 or 7 months ago. It was just a massive project, a huge endeavor. As you can tell by the length of this video, it was not a video I could make in a day. So I really do appreciate those of you who are really patient in waiting for this guide. If you like this video, you might find some other videos on my channel that are interesting, so feel free to hit that red subscribe button, leave a like if you enjoyed or this helped you out, and other than that, best of luck at Reqs. Have a good one, and peace out.